And I say, they did not teach the practice of Zazen because the time was not yet right. And someone asks, but did they know about the importance of Zazen? And I say, if they had known, then they would have taught it to all. And someone says, people say we shouldn't regret the fact that we are born and from then on travel towards our death. But there is a very quick way to escape from this cycle. We simply need to realize that we have an internal soul, and that although the physical body is born and travels onward toward death, the soul does not die. Once we know that we have this original essence that survives the cycle of life and death, we can see that the body is just a temporary repository which dies here and is born there, but it is not enduring. But our soul, our mind, is eternal and unchanging through past, present and future. And once we know this, we can free ourselves from the cycle of life and death and escape from it forever, so that when our physical body dies, we can enter nirvana and become perfect Buddhas. But even knowing this fact, the body we have now is shaped by our actions in past lives, and so we are not yet perfect. Those who do not know this are trapped forever in the cycle of birth and death. So we should make efforts to understand the nature of the eternal soul as fast as we can. We cannot gain anything from spending our lives just sitting facing the wall. This is the truth that the Buddhas and ancestors taught, isn't it? And I say, the teaching is completely different from the truth that the Buddha taught. It is not Buddhism, it is Brahmanism. In that religion they teach that there is a spiritual intelligence in our body that guides our likes and dislikes and distinguishes between right and wrong. It feels pain and anger and suffering and pleasure. And when the body dies, this spiritual intelligence lives on in heaven as an immortal being. That is their belief. But if we think that is the truth of Buddhism, we are stupid as someone who picks up a stone and thinks it is a jewel. It is so stupid that I can't find an example that can describe the extent of this delusion. Master Nanyo Echo warned us sternly against this kind of belief. If we believe that physical things perish, but the soul is eternal, that body and mind are separate, and that this is the Buddha's truth and the way to escape the cycle of life and death, then we are in fact promoting the very cause of suffering. Then we are very stupid. That would be a great shame. We should be clear that this is not Buddhism and should close our ears to it. But I can't help wanting to convince you why this view is wrong. The truth that the Buddha taught is that mind and body, soul and matter are not separate. This teaching was clearly understood both in India and in China. We should not contradict it. Even schools of idealistic philosophy in India thought that body and mind are not divided, and even the schools of materialistic philosophy in India asserted that essence and form are not divided. So how can we say that, on the contrary, the body is mortal but the mind or soul is eternal? That goes against reason. What is more, we should realize that nirvana exists right here in the middle of our living and dying. No Buddhist has ever suggested that there is nirvana existing outside of this life itself. What is more, even if we believe that the Buddhist truth is that the eternal soul frees itself from the body, and this is how we become free from the cycle of life and death, the mind which is thinking and believing this is experienced as appearing and disappearing at each moment, so it cannot be eternal. Notice how unreliable this understanding is. The Buddhist teachings constantly assert that body and mind is undivided. So how can the body appear and disappear while the mind leaves the body and does not? If we can say that sometimes body and mind are one reality and sometimes they are not, then what the Buddha taught cannot be said to be true. What is more, if we think of our daily life as something to escape from, then we must end up hating the truth that the Buddha taught. We must guard against this. Remember that the truth that has been taught from person to person in one line says that pure original consciousness includes everything in undivided wholeness. This includes the whole universe, without any things being divided into physical form and value, and without any thought of appearing or disappearing. None of the states that are described with the words body or nirvana are different from this original consciousness. Everything in the universe is included in this wholeness. Nothing is left out. All lines of teachings that teach the truth assert that all things and phenomena are one with balanced and undivided consciousness. That's all there is. This is how Buddhists understand the essential state. So how we divide reality into body and mind, or into life and death and nirvana, since we are already following the Buddha's teachings, we should close our ears to these crazy theories. And someone asks, is it important for someone who is devoted to practicing Zazen to also keep the precepts absolutely? And I say, keeping the precepts and acting in a balanced way are the standards of the schools that practice Zazen, and the usual habits of our ancestors. But people who haven't yet received the precepts or who have broken the precepts will still share in the state of Zazen when they practice it. Someone asks, is there anything wrong with people who practice Zazen also using a mantra or doing quiet reflection practices known as Vipassana? And I say, when I was in China, I learned the true teachings from a true master. He said that he had never heard of any of our ancestors who passed on the essence of the Buddha's truth, ever performing additional practices like these, either in India or in China, either in the past or at the present. If we don't devote ourselves to one teaching, we will never attain complete wisdom. Someone asks, can ordinary people practice Zazen at home, or is it only for monks and nuns in temples? I say, one of our ancestors said that we must not discriminate between men and women or between ordained or ordinary. And someone asks, people who leave home to live in a temple don't have any problem in finding the time to practice Zazen and learning what the truth is. But how can an ordinary person with their busy life find time to devote themselves to sitting in the unintentional state of truth? I say, the practice that the Buddha taught us is generous and compassionate. Everyone can do it and sit in the state of truth. We can find many examples in the past and present of this. For example, 2 emperors in the 8th and 9th century China were able to carry out their state duties and also find the time to practice Zazen. Also, their government ministers who were running the country practiced Zazen and realized the truth of Buddhism. It depends solely on whether you have the will to do it or not on whether you live in a temple or at home. Someone who notices how important practicing Zazen is will find the time. People who think that worldly affairs make it impossible to follow the Buddhist truth believe that the Buddha's truth is separate from everyday life. They do not understand that the Buddha's truth is not separate from everyday life and makes no distinction between the secular and the sacred. An important government minister in Sung, China, called Hio, knew the Buddha's truth well. In his later years, he wrote the following poem: I love to practice Zazen when my work allows me to, although I can barely find the time to sleep. Although I am now Prime Minister, everyone knows me as someone who has been practicing Zazen for many years. Although he was very busy with his official duties, he was able to realize the truth is because of his strong will. We should compare this with our own situation. In present-day China, kings and ministers, officials and ordinary people all practice Zazen and learn about the truth. Thus it is indisputable that work and the affairs of the world do not stop us from learning the truth of the Buddha. When the truth spreads through a nation, that nation's affairs become peaceful. When the nation becomes peaceful, then the Buddha's truth can spread. When the Buddha was alive, even people who had committed crimes and people who had crazy ideas were able to get the truth. And some of our ancestors were uneducated people, hunters and woodcutters. We just need to study the teachings and practice Zazen under a true teacher. And someone asks, are we still sitting in the state of truth when we practice Zazen, even in these corrupt modern times?